Cleopatra, the last pharaoh of Egypt, was not just a queen, she was a living goddess. Her treasury was the wealthiest on earth, holding more value than even Egypt's legendary grain harvests, filled with gold, spices, and silk. But as the Roman legions closed in on her empire, Cleopatra had to execute her greatest secret. Where do you hide the gold that the Romans can never find? History suggests this vast fortune is either submerged beneath the thick silt of the Nile or locked away in a secret desert fortress. 2,000 years later, does this hoard still await discovery? Stick with us as we dive into one of history's most tantalizing riddles. They called her not only a queen but a living goddess. Cleopatra, 7th Fear. Philopator, the last pharaoh of Egypt, was born in 69 BCE into a dynasty that had already ruled for nearly 3 centuries. She was not just another monarch in a long line of rulers. She was the culmination of Egypt's power, beauty, and cunning. From her very birth, whispers filled the palace walls of Alexandria. Whispers that the child carried both the burden and the glory of an empire older than Rome itself. Cleopatra grew up in a world where Egypt's wealth was unmatched. The Nile River was the artery of life, and with every flooding season, it brought black silt that fed the land and produced harvest richer than any other kingdom. Grain was gold in the ancient world, and Egypt had so much of it that nations bent their knees to her father's throne, begging for shipments to feed their people. But for Egypt, grain was only one of many treasures. From the mines of Nubia came pure gold, carried up the Nile on barges and melted into ingots that shone like fire. From the Red Sea ports came spices, perfumes, and silk, traded along routes that stretched into India and beyond. Ivory from Africa, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, cedar wood from Lebanon. Alexandria was a crossroads of the ancient world, and everything precious seemed to flow into Cleopatra's reach. Her palace, overlooking the Mediterranean, was not simply a seat of power, it was a treasury of marvels. Ancient writers claimed that the royal vaults contained mountains of coin, great statues of silver, and walls plated in beaten gold. Cleopatra, even as a young princess, understood that wealth was more than luxury. It was power. It was survival. When her father, Ptolemy the Theodolites, died, Egypt trembled. The Ptolemaic dynasty, descended from Alexander the Great's general, had ruled for centuries, but corruption and intrigue weakened its foundation. Cleopatra was only 18 when she ascended to the throne in 51 BCE, sharing it nominally with her younger brother Ptolemy III. But in truth, the weight of Egypt fell upon her alone. She inherited not only a throne, but enemies at every corner. Rome's shadow loomed large, and within her own palace, advisors plotted, priests whispered, and generals dreamed of their own crowns. Yet Cleopatra's mind was sharper than any dagger. She spoke at least 9 languages, including Greek, Egyptian, and Hebrew, making her one of the most educated rulers of her age. Unlike her forefathers, she embraced Egyptian traditions, presenting herself not merely as a Greek monarch, but as the living embodiment of Isis, goddess of fertility and rebirth. And always, in the heart of her reign, there was the question of wealth. Cleopatra poured treasures into temples, buying the loyalty of priests. She rewarded soldiers with gold, ensuring the military's allegiance. She invested in scholars who made Alexandria's library the beacon of knowledge. But beyond her gifts, she was also careful. Some say she built secret vaults beneath the palace, chambers known only to her most loyal servants, where bars of gold and priceless jewels were kept for times of desperation. By the time Julius Caesar set foot in Alexandria in 48 BCE, Cleopatra was already legend. Stories spread across the Mediterranean of a queen whose beauty was dazzling, but whose wit was sharper than steel. Yet what Rome coveted most was not her smile. It was her treasure. Caesar, entangled in Rome's civil war, understood that Egypt's wealth could tip the balance of power, and Cleopatra understood that Caesar's power could preserve her throne. Thus began one of the most famous alliances in history. Cleopatra dazzled Caesar not only with her charm, but with the vast resources at her disposal. Gold financed his campaigns, Egyptian grain fed his armies, and in return, Caesar defended her throne against her brother's rebellion. Together, they became partners in both politics and passion. But while Caesar returned to Rome, Cleopatra remained in Alexandria, ruling with a quiet brilliance. Her treasury grew even greater during these years. Rome consumed grain and luxury goods like a starving beast, and Egypt supplied it all. Ships laden with Egyptian goods poured into Roman harbors, and coins bearing Cleopatra's face circulated through markets. The vaults swelled, the walls of her palace glittered brighter, and whispers grew louder that Cleopatra had more gold than any monarch alive, and yet she was not blind to danger. For every ally Rome provided, there were enemies waiting for Egypt to falter. Cleopatra began to plan. Ancient writings hint that she ordered the construction of hidden chambers far from Alexandria. Some say in the cliffs along the Nile, others beneath the sands near Memphis. These were not tombs for the dead, but fortresses for the living, meant to safeguard the treasure that defined her reign. In this way, Cleopatra became not just a queen of Egypt, but the guardian of its unimaginable wealth. Every ingot of gold, every gem of priceless value, was not merely for adornment. It was the shield against Rome, the bargaining chip for survival, and perhaps the greatest secret she ever carried to her grave. The sky over Alexandria turned the color of old parchment the night Octavian's banners first appeared on the horizon. Ships, like dark teeth, cut through the Mediterranean toward the harbor. Flags snapped in a wind that carried the smell of salt and smoke. Within the palace, torches guttered in long corridors, and the clinking of chains and metal sounded like uneasy applause. Rumors had arrived first of the defeat at Actium, of Antony's shattered fleet, of Octavian's inexorable march. Then came the soldiers, Roman veterans with faces like bruised marble, their eyes cataloging treasure as well as territory. Cleopatra watched this all from a window in her private apartments, draped like a queen of myth and iron. She had expected war. She had expected invasion. She had not expected defeat to taste so bitter. Antony had returned to Alexandria with the tale of his dreams broken, and with him the last thread of hope that Rome might be turned into an ally rather than a conqueror. As whispers of betrayal seeped through the city, officers offering their services to Octavian, merchants haggling for Roman favor, she understood that the only thing that might outlast the change of emperors was the gold. The bullion and gems that had built her alliances, padded her coffers, and made the palace less a residence than a vault. The story of the gold's disappearance begins in those terrible, luminous hours when decisions mattered more than breath. If treasure could be thought of as a living animal, then every hand in Alexandria was suddenly trying to decide whether to keep it, feed it, blind it, or drown it. Cleopatra summoned to her presence the men she trusted most, not the blunt-faced generals who wanted to fight, but the quiet ones who counted and remembered. Her treasurer, a man named Sostratus in the queen's private circle, was thin as a reed and twice as resilient. He had been entrusted with ledgers that could rival the scrolls of any merchant bank. Inventories of ingots, consignments of jewelry, lists of sacred votive gifts and grain shipments stored for the coming winter. For months he had been preparing for contingency. Gold moved fast. Gold could disappear faster. He had watched ships come and go, stamped and sealed chests loaded and unloaded at dawn, and he had murmured to himself a plan that now seemed more prayer than strategy. "Your Majesty," Sostratus said quietly, as though even words might be taxed in that room, "we cannot let Rome have everything. Some must be hidden. Some must be removed beyond the reach of soldiers who sail with looters at heart." Cleopatra's hand rested on a chest carved with the image of Isis. Her voice was a slow river. "Not everything can be moved, Sostratus. Much is in temples and sanctuaries. To move it would anger the gods. Yet I will not see the treasury paraded through the streets of Rome as spoils." She ordered a triage of treasures. Priests were summoned to sanctify what must remain. Offerings meant to keep the favor of the gods no matter which banner flew above the city. Priests also became conspirators. Religious protocol offered perfect cover for movement. Within hours, Sostratus and a network of boatmen, masons, and temple attendants had devised a series of concealments so audacious they bordered on sacrilege. First, some of the treasure was to be sunk, not into the open sea where currents and Roman divers would eventually find them, but into the silt-laden arms of the Nile, in places the Romans considered uncharted, where shifting channels and reed-choked lagoons could bury entire ships in mud and memory. Boxes were heavily weighted and sealed with pitch and resin. Sailors who knew the river's moods rowed under cover of night to slip them into the green mouth of Nile-choked coves. The act felt like a baptism and a burial combined. Second, select pieces were to be hidden in plain sight. Gold plates and jewelry were reworked into temple statuary, hammered flat, cast into the breasts of stone gods, or placed in the hollow cores of colossal figures. The idea was simple and cruelly effective. Temples were sacred and therefore legally and culturally protected. Roman soldiers might plunder sanctuaries, but priests could plausibly claim ignorance or divine ownership. Some of those statues moved under moonlight on barrows and were installed in remote shrines at the edge of the desert, out of the city's reach. Third, and this was a plan born of cunning rather than prayer, entire convoys of decoy cargoes were sent in the opposite direction of Alexandria. Camouflaged barges carried crates washed in Nile sand and fool's gold, misleading would-be buyers and scouts into believing the bulk of the treasure had been smuggled away. Meanwhile, true cargoes were moved along labyrinthine routes, up the Nile to the fortress towns, and then inland into the desert valleys. In places where the bedrock had been hollowed by ancient quarrying, vaults were prepared, rooms hewn by laborers who told no one what they did. Men such as Sostratus paid with bribes and oaths. They used old miners and veteran sailors, people who knew how to keep both silence and secrets. There were whispers, too, that some of Cleopatra's most private treasures, the personal hoard that had nothing to do with statecraft, were placed inside a mausoleum she had arranged for herself, a hidden burial vault that would only reveal its contents when the winds of history permitted. Whether this was true or simply a story planted to confuse Roman looters is a question that would echo through centuries. As these salvage operations unfolded, so did acts of desperation. Antony, wounded in spirit and body, sank into a private hell. Word spread that he had ordered barricades and hidden a portion of his own wealth among the legions that still professed loyalty. Others said he made a last attempt to sail away with Cleopatra and the remaining treasure. In truth, Antony lingered because he could not imagine life without the crowns and honors that had made him a god to the Eastern peoples. He gambled on the hope that Octavian would negotiate or that fortune would reverse. The gamble failed. When Octavian's forces finally entered the city, they marched not as conquerors to a ruined capital, but as men expecting a rich banquet. Rome had, in the decades of its expansion, developed a taste for the exotic and a practice of turning conquered wealth into the coin of new power. Octavian, shrewd, patient, lighter on magnanimity than Caesar had been, understood what treasure could buy. Gladiators' games to distract the masses, public works to seal his claim to the heart of Roman life, and, most importantly, the leveraging of Egypt's grain to shore up Rome's markets and, by extension, his political legitimacy. Roman accounts, terse and triumphant, talk of the pageants in which spoils were displayed. Yet the truth was more complicated. What Rome found in Alexandria was split between what lay in daylight, temple hoards, royal regalia, and publicly stored wealth, and what had been spirited away under cover of night. Octavian confiscated what he could. The rest became a rumor-laden blank space in the records. Soldiers and officers kept back what they could hide and smelt. Jewels were stripped for their stones. Gold was melted into ingots and recast. Once melted, gold lost the traces of its origin. A ring that had clasped Cleopatra's finger might become a ribbon of coin used to pay a Roman centurion. This alchemical erasure is one reason why precise accounting of the queen's wealth became impossible. Yet even Rome's appetite could not account for everything. There remained if one believes the reports of secretive priests and the testimony of boatmen who later confessed. In taverns under too much wine, caches so well concealed that they simply vanished from the ledger of history. One priest who survived the sack whispered to a young merchant years later that treasure had been placed within the foundations of a temple at Taposiris, a name that would echo in later excavations, sealed with a hymn and then locked behind a stone slab. Another older sailor insisted that he had helped sink 7 barges filled with gold near a reed bed south of the city. He drew on the sand a crude map that led his listeners to nothing but black mud and a smell of rot. The later centuries would be a patchwork of scavengers and scholars. Arab chroniclers who wrote centuries after the fall of Rome told their own versions. European treasure hunters added feverish details during the medieval and early modern periods. And local folk songs kept alive images of golden chests buried deep beneath sandy hills. Each retelling added a coat of varnish to the myth. Some insisted Cleopatra had sent the treasure to Indian princes on camels, others that Nubian kings had received it as a bribe to shelter the queen's lineage. Each had its kernel of plausibility and its flourish of fantasy. But there was, buried among the legends, one tangible clue that refused to die. A single tiny thing that would keep hope alive for centuries. It was an amulet no larger than a coin decorated with the serpent and sun disk of Isis. The story goes that Sostratus took it off the chain of one of Cleopatra's private boxes, wrapped it in reed and wax, and then hurled it into the Nile as he watched a barge sink with the queen's jewelry. The amulet did not sink cleanly. It snagged on a submerged root and was carried a little way downstream. For a few nights, it rested on the riverbed near a fisherman's net, catching the moonlight like a small, stubborn star. 100 years later, when the river had shifted and cities had names no longer in use, a child in a fishing village found that amulet in his palm. He wore it for luck and later traded it for a loaf of bread, and later still it turned up in a market in a town the Romans had founded. Merchants sold the story with the ornament, plundered from the queen, they would say, and a coin might change hands. The amulet moved like gossip across islands and markets from hand to hand, its true origin blurred, its tale growing with each teller. When Octavian paraded the captured regalia through Rome, perhaps the crowd glimpsed similar trinkets on display. Perhaps they cheered for the sight of Oriental luxury. The spectacle mattered more than the provenance. For modern eyes, sifting through these events, it becomes difficult to separate the purposeful acts of concealment from the accidents of fate. Some caches were certainly sunk and lost to sediment. Other treasures were indeed converted into the lifeblood of imperial Rome. Some stored pads of bullion might have been broken into smaller lots and spirited away by private hands, and some, perhaps the most valuable in terms of knowledge rather than pure metal, were never treasure of gold at all, but scrolls, maps, and ledgers. If Alexandria's storehouses had once contained not just coins, but records, shipping manifests, secret contracts, and lists of shipments hidden in unassuming temples, then the loss of those documents might matter as much as the loss of the gold. Without them, future generations could not trace the routes by which Cleopatra's wealth moved. As the city settled under Roman rule, a new economic order dawned. Octavian used what he had taken to cement his power, while the remainder, scattered and secret, became a ghostly presence in the Mediterranean imagination. Treasure hunters would comb the sands for centuries. Archaeologists would later peer through layers of silt and rubble with better tools and worse hopes. And local storytellers would keep the queen's name alive in songs and curses. Yet, in the small rooms where priests had once smuggled their gold, in the reed beds where barges sank, and in the mouths of merchants who later traded in ornate but originless jewelry, the memory of what had been lost outstretched like a net. Vast, incomplete, and full of holes, the loss then was not only of metal and gem, but of context, where things had been, why they had been there, and who had moved them. Cleopatra's gold had been political capital, social insurance, and sacred offering all at once. To lose it was to lose a part of the story of Egypt's final stand. But loss breeds myth. The less that was known, the more the imagination filled the gaps. And so, an empire's accounting error multiplied into 1,000 possibilities. In the chaos that followed, Sostratus vanished from history the way men who had betrayed too much do, quietly. Some said he hid in a desert village and lived out his days teaching children to read ledgers written in a hand that never again would tally royal treasure. Others whispered that he took with him one last map, a cipher woven into a hymn that could lead, if only the reader knew how to listen, to a vault that would reveal Cleopatra's last secret. Whether the map was true or merely a final kindness to thwart Roman greed, it entered the long archive of rumor and rumor's offspring. Treasure maps, cryptic verses, keys hidden in hymnals. That is how Alexandria fell, and how the gold began to scatter into mud, into the mouths of Roman bankers and soldiers, into the foundations of temples, into the veins of myth. The immediate aftermath belonged to Rome. The long tail belonged to every age that followed. Treasure, by its nature, forces the living to reckon with the dead. Cleopatra's lost gold forced the world to reckon with a queen who had been both sovereign and strategist, goddess and gambler. And somewhere beyond the clatter of imperial triumphs, beyond the melted ingots and the temples restocked with new offerings, an old man in a fishing village still handed a child the story of a tiny amulet that had once glinted on the palm of a queen. The child swallowed the tale like a seed. Generations later, that seed would sprout into quests and excavations and fevered research. The true disappearance of Cleopatra's gold thus became two things at once: a historical event with practical consequences and a myth with a life of its own, one that would, even now, continue to nudge explorers toward dunes and divers into green waters, in search of an answer that history had refused to give. When the dust settled over Alexandria and Octavian's banners fluttered in the Mediterranean sun, Rome believed it had won more than just a city. It had seized the last jewel of the Ptolemaic dynasty. Soldiers marched through streets still warm from the echoes of battle, their eyes scanning for loot, their boots kicking up sand and ashes alike. Yet amid the grandeur and the triumph, the treasure they had expected to parade through the streets, the legendary gold of Cleopatra, was largely gone. Roman historians later described the queen's wealth in awestruck prose. Suetonius and Plutarch, chroniclers of empire and legend, noted that Alexandria had once contained gold enough to sink ships and feed empires. But what the soldiers found was incomplete, a scattering of coins, fragments of jewelry and ceremonial objects that hinted at unimaginable riches, but could not begin to account for the full scale of Cleopatra's wealth. The Roman hunt for the lost treasure began in earnest. Octavian, later Emperor Augustus, understood that conquering Egypt was not merely about annexing land. It was about controlling wealth that could fuel Rome's burgeoning empire. He dispatched trusted officers and engineers to trace every lead, every rumor, and every secret route whispered about by the surviving priests and loyal servants of the late queen. Accounts suggest that Sostratus, Cleopatra's trusted treasurer, had orchestrated the movement of the gold with meticulous care. Some was sunk into the Nile's silt-laden channels, weighted and camouflaged, meant to disappear into the river's muddy embrace. Other portions were hidden in temple vaults under the pretense of sacred offerings. Rome's search parties, despite their numbers and determination, often arrived too late. The currents of the Nile shifted the treasures. Secret chambers were sealed with hymns and stone slabs, and decoy shipments misled the most diligent of scouts. Roman ingenuity was formidable. Engineers constructed dredging equipment, divers explored shallow canals, and spies interrogated temple priests. Yet, no matter the effort, the treasure seemed to vanish like smoke. Rome melted down what they could find. Ingots were recast into coins, jewelry was repurposed, and any trace of Cleopatra's personal fortune became part of the Roman economy. Still, portions of her wealth eluded even the empire's grasp. Some of the most tantalizing clues came from fragments of papyri and inscriptions. One document, discovered centuries later near Thebes, hinted at hidden vaults in Taposiris Magna, where sacred coins and gold plates had been placed under divine protection. Another account described submerged barges sunk under the cover of darkness, with chests full of precious metals and jewels that now rested beneath centuries of silt and mud, waiting for the daring or fortunate to uncover them. Yet, amidst the historical facts, legend began to grow. Roman soldiers who had witnessed the queen's gold whisper to merchants in secret taverns, describing amulets and tiny artifacts that bore the mark of Isis. Some said Cleopatra had entrusted part of her hoard to her allies in distant kingdoms, smuggling treasures along the Mediterranean coast toward lands still loyal to Egypt. Others claimed that she had sent the most precious jewels to India, a kingdom that had welcomed Egyptian envoys for centuries. The disappearance of Cleopatra's gold became a puzzle that confounded the greatest minds of Rome. Even Octavian, a master strategist, acknowledged in private correspondence that some of the treasure was likely beyond reach, hidden in ways designed to remain secret for centuries. Soldiers returned home with gold and silver, but whispers of the remaining fortune persisted, transforming history into legend. Over the following decades, Rome tried to trace every rumor. Merchants, adventurers, and treasure hunters searched Alexandria, the Nile Delta, and surrounding deserts. Some found small caches of coins or ceremonial objects, but the core of Cleopatra's wealth remained elusive. These searches inspired a new form of legend, blending historical record with imagination, laying the foundation for centuries of myth and speculation. Even as Rome stabilized Egypt and integrated its riches into the empire, the idea of Cleopatra's lost treasure persisted. The queen had outwitted the most powerful empire of her time, leaving behind a legacy not only of political genius, but of a treasure that became a symbol of mystery and allure. Historians marveled not just at the quantity of gold, but at the ingenuity of its concealment. Every sunken barge, every hidden vault, every misleading shipment became a story, feeding the imagination of explorers, scholars, and storytellers for generations to come. By the time the medieval world emerged, the story of Cleopatra's lost gold had already grown larger than the historical record. It was no longer merely an event in 30 BCE. It had become a legend whispered across empires, a treasure whispered in the bazaars of Cairo, the markets of Venice, and the ports of Lisbon. Each generation added its own layer of speculation, exaggeration, and hope. Yet amidst these tales, historians later pieced together fragments of truth. Cleopatra had not simply lost her treasure. She had deliberately orchestrated its disappearance. The sunken barges in the Nile, hidden vaults in temples, and secret convoys along the desert and Mediterranean coasts were not accidents. They were part of a plan designed to preserve her legacy and protect Egypt's wealth from being plundered entirely. In this way, Cleopatra's gold became more than currency. It became a story of strategy, loyalty, and foresight, a mystery that would outlive the empire that sought it. The Romans may have won Alexandria, but the queen had ensured that a portion of her treasure and the secrets of its concealment would remain untouchable, haunting historians and treasure hunters for millennia to come. By the 7th century, the grandeur of Alexandria had faded. The city, once the heartbeat of Mediterranean commerce and scholarship, had endured the Roman conquest, plagues, and earthquakes. Yet the story of Cleopatra's lost gold remained alive, whispered in the corridors of mosques, trading caravans, and coastal ports across the Arab world. Arab chroniclers and historians, writing centuries after the fall of the Ptolemaic dynasty, were captivated by the tales of Cleopatra's wealth. Writers such as al-Masudi and Ibn Khaldun recounted legends passed down through traders and elders, stories of vast treasures hidden beneath the sands, secret vaults within temples, and sunken ships laden with gold in the shifting waters of the Nile Delta. Al-Masudi, often called the Herodotus of the Arabs, described Egypt as a land of both wonders and curses, and within his writings, there are cryptic references to a queen whose riches rivaled entire kingdoms. Though he did not provide precise locations, he noted that the Nile itself had swallowed much of her wealth, carrying it into lagoons and hidden channels beyond Roman reach. Traders and pilgrims later added flourishes to these stories, gold-laden barges that could rise again with the right celestial alignment, temples whose stones held the secrets of hidden vaults, and priests who carried coded hymns guiding the worthy to the treasure. The Arab chronicler's fascination was not merely about wealth, it was about the wisdom and cunning of Cleopatra. She had, according to these sources, manipulated not only the Roman Empire, but also the elements themselves. The sun, the river, and the desert became tools in her strategy, ensuring that her treasure could not be claimed without understanding her genius. European travelers who would later read these chronicles were spellbound. Marco Polo, centuries later, described Egypt as a land of unimaginable wealth, referencing stories of golden crowns, jeweled chariots, and sunken ships once attributed to Cleopatra. The blending of history and legend created a narrative almost impossible to separate. Was it fact, exaggeration, or a clever mix designed to protect the secret? Local Egyptian folklore also contributed. Fishermen on the Nile Delta told tales of submerged barges that glinted beneath the river at sunrise. Desert dwellers spoke of hidden caverns where gold bars lay beneath layers of stone, guarded by spirits or protective curses. These stories, often dismissed as superstition by outsiders, guided treasure hunters for centuries and became woven into the very cultural memory of Egypt. During this medieval period, treasure hunting became both a vocation and a dream. Adventurers traveled along the Nile, consulted the Arab chronicles, and tried to decipher ancient maps and poems. Some claimed success, discovering small caches of coins or ceremonial items, yet the vast majority of Cleopatra's wealth remained elusive. Each failed attempt, however, only added to the mystique, creating a growing aura of the greatest treasure never found. Interestingly, many Arab chroniclers hinted at the symbolic importance of Cleopatra's gold. They suggested that the treasure represented more than wealth. It embodied the continuity of Egypt itself, a safeguard for knowledge, culture, and sovereignty against foreign domination. In hiding it, Cleopatra had not merely protected material wealth, she had preserved the dignity and legacy of her people. By the end of the medieval period, Cleopatra's gold had evolved from historical fact into myth. It became a narrative of cunning, loyalty, and mystery, a treasure that transcended time, influencing explorers, writers, and scholars alike. Arab chronicles served as a bridge, keeping the story alive and passing it to the European imagination, which would later fuel Renaissance expeditions, pirate legends, and the modern quest for the lost Ptolemaic treasure. The Queen's gold, in effect, had survived 2 millennia, not in vaults or coffers, but in stories, myths, and the collective fascination of every generation that dared to imagine its glittering secrets. It was a treasure that lived in words as much as in metal, a phantom of wealth that inspired countless journeys, quests, and dreams. By the 15th century, Europe was awakening from the long shadow of the Middle Ages. The Renaissance had begun, a rebirth of art, science, and curiosity. Scholars and explorers turned their gaze toward the classical world, and the legends of Cleopatra's lost gold captured the imagination of artists, writers, and adventurers alike. Italian and French scholars pored over translations of Arab chronicles, combined them with classical Roman texts, and produced elaborate accounts of Egypt's final queen. Cleopatra's wealth, described in these accounts as enough to rival the treasury of heaven, became the ultimate symbol of both allure and danger. Maps were drawn, often cryptically, suggesting hidden vaults, sunken barges, and secret desert chambers where the Ptolemaic gold had vanished. Merchants in Venice and Genoa, eager for both profit and adventure, funded expeditions along the Nile Delta. Some sought purely material gain. Others were inspired by the mystique of Cleopatra herself, the queen who had outwitted Caesar, charmed Antony, and challenged the might of Rome. Treasure hunters studied river currents, consulted local Egyptian guides, and even employed early forms of archaeology to locate temple vaults mentioned in centuries-old texts. Art and literature of the period further immortalized the queen's gold. Painters depicted Cleopatra adorned in jewels of impossible richness, reclining amid gold ingots and bejeweled artifacts. Writers described treasures so vast that ships sank under their weight, gilded halls lined with statues, and temples whose walls seemed to glimmer with wealth. These images, though often exaggerated, reinforced the allure of the lost fortune. The Portuguese, during their explorations along the Red Sea and Indian Ocean, heard tales of Cleopatra's treasures allegedly sent eastward. Stories of gold, spices, and jewels carried by secret fleets reached Goa and beyond, sparking speculation that parts of the queen's wealth might lie in distant kingdoms. Some explorers returned with minor treasures or ancient coins, but the core of Cleopatra's hoard remained hidden, adding to its legend. Even pirate lore became entwined with her story. The Mediterranean, during the 16th and 17th centuries, teemed with corsairs who thrived on stories of lost treasures. Legends suggested that Cleopatra had buried caches on remote islands or hidden them along coastal caves, guarded by cunning traps or protective curses. Treasure maps, often fancifully illustrated, circulated among sailors, merchants, and would-be adventurers. Many of these maps were fabrications, yet each carried a kernel of historical plausibility, sustaining centuries of obsession. The Renaissance fascination with Cleopatra's gold was not only about wealth, it was about the merging of history, mystery, and human ambition. Her treasure became a symbol of ultimate achievement and ultimate risk. To find it was to connect with the queen herself, to grasp a piece of her intellect, strategy, and legendary charisma. Explorers, artists, and writers obsessed over these symbols, often blending fact with imagination, creating a cultural legacy that elevated Cleopatra's lost gold beyond mere physical treasure. By the end of the 17th century, Europe was rife with stories of gold buried in deserts, sunken in rivers, or hidden beneath ancient temples. The queen's legacy as both ruler and strategist was inseparable from the idea of her wealth. Every expedition, every painting, and every story built upon the centuries-old mystery. Cleopatra's treasure was not lost merely because of time, but because she had outwitted history itself. Even modern treasure hunters would later acknowledge the enduring power of these Renaissance accounts. While factual accuracy was often scarce, the documents preserved roots, legends, and local knowledge that had survived from Roman times and Arab chronicles. In effect, the obsession of Renaissance Europe ensured that Cleopatra's gold would never be forgotten. It was a story reborn in every generation, an inspiration for all who dared to seek it. The legend of Cleopatra's lost gold endured for centuries, whispered through medieval bazaars, Renaissance maps, and pirate lore. But by the 19th century, a new era arrived, an era where curiosity met science. Archaeology began to emerge as a disciplined field, and scholars turned to Egypt with tools and techniques that had never existed before. Cleopatra's treasure, once a story for sailors and adventurers, became a subject of academic pursuit. European explorers, particularly from Britain, France, and Germany, flocked to Alexandria and the Nile Delta. They scoured temple ruins, desiccated tombs and sediment-laden canals, seeking traces of the queen's wealth. Early excavations revealed fragments of coins, ceremonial jewelry, and architectural remnants that hinted at the grandeur of the Ptolemaic dynasty, but no massive treasure hoards. The Taposiris Magna temple, southwest of Alexandria, became a focus of particular interest. Ancient texts and Arab chronicles had long suggested that Cleopatra had hidden gold there, protected by priests and secured with secret vaults. Excavations in the 20th century uncovered buried chambers, ceremonial objects, and inscriptions referencing the queen, but still no bulk treasure. Archaeologists concluded that while some wealth had been stored in temples, The bulk had been moved, melted, or lost to history. Underwater archaeology also revolutionized the search. The Nile's channels, which had shifted over millennia, could potentially hide the sunken barges described in Roman and medieval accounts. Using sonar, submersibles, and modern diving equipment, teams explored the riverbeds and lagoons. Occasionally, they discovered coins, amulets, and fragments of ships, evidence that Cleopatra's treasure had indeed been transported via water. But the fabled hoards of gold remained elusive. Some finds, however, were remarkable. Small golden amulets depicting the sun disk of Isis, similar to those described in Roman accounts, surfaced in the Nile Delta. Jewelry fragments with unmistakable Ptolemaic craftsmanship were uncovered in temple ruins. Each discovery, while minor in material terms, validated centuries of stories about the queen's cunning and her treasure's movement. Modern historians began to re-examine ancient texts with new methodologies. By cross-referencing Roman accounts, Arab chronicles, and archaeological evidence, they constructed probable scenarios. Cleopatra had deliberately distributed her wealth into multiple forms: sunken barges, temple caches, hidden inland vaults, and secret convoys. The ingenuity of her planning meant that even the Romans, with all their might, could never fully capture it. Advances in technology continue to fuel the quest. Satellite imaging, ground-penetrating radar, and 3D mapping allow archaeologists to investigate potential sites in ways unimaginable to previous generations. Occasionally, rumors of finds surface: a hoard discovered by a farmer, a hidden chamber revealed by erosion, but none have yielded the legendary scale of wealth described in history. The modern archaeological perspective adds another layer to the legend. Cleopatra's gold was not merely wealth, it was a testament to strategic foresight, cultural preservation, and historical legacy. While scholars may never recover the physical treasure in its entirety, each discovery, from a tiny amulet to fragments of a gilded statue, connects the present to the queen's ingenuity and the enduring mystery she left behind. By bridging ancient records with modern science, archaeologists have ensured that Cleopatra's lost gold continues to inspire exploration, scholarship, and imagination. The queen's treasure, though largely vanished from sight, has survived in history's memory, reminding us that some legends are designed not to be found, but to endure. Even after centuries of investigation, Cleopatra's lost gold remains one of history's most tantalizing mysteries. Scholars, archaeologists, and treasure hunters have long debated what truly happened to the queen's wealth, and multiple theories have emerged, each with its own evidence, allure, and controversy. One prevailing hypothesis is that the gold was sunk in the Nile. Ancient accounts describe Cleopatra's use of river barges to transport treasures secretly during the final weeks of her reign. Weighted chests, hidden beneath canvas and reeds, may have been submerged deliberately to evade Roman capture. The shifting currents, sediment deposits, and centuries of Nile floods could have buried these treasures deep beneath silt, making them nearly impossible to locate. Some modern underwater expeditions in the Nile Delta have discovered small caches of coins and jewelry, hinting that the queen's strategy may have worked, at least in part. Another theory proposes that temples and secret inland vaults held the bulk of her wealth. Historians cite Taposiris Magna and other Ptolemaic temples as likely hiding places, based on inscriptions, papyri fragments, and Arab chronicles. Priests, bound by oaths of secrecy, may have concealed the treasures in hidden chambers using coded hymns, symbolic carvings, and protective curses. While modern excavations have uncovered artifacts and coins, the larger caches of gold remain elusive, lending credibility to this idea. A more daring hypothesis suggests that Cleopatra's gold was smuggled to distant kingdoms. Roman historians hinted that part of the treasure may have been sent eastward, possibly to India or allied Mediterranean states where she had political connections. Trade routes, merchant ships, and secret convoys could have transported jewelry, ingots, and ceremonial items to ensure they survived the Roman conquest. Some scholars argue that fragments of Egyptian-style jewelry found in ancient Indian royal collections may support this claim, though definitive evidence remains scarce. There is also a theory of systematic redistribution. Cleopatra may have dispersed her wealth in multiple forms: coins hidden in temples, bullion submerged in rivers, and valuables entrusted to allies abroad. This strategy would not only preserve the treasure, but also maintain political leverage, as her gold could be used to support loyalists, fund strategic operations, or secure her legacy beyond death. Such a plan would explain why Rome found fragments, but never the full hoard. Modern scholars have explored more speculative explanations, including the possibility that portions of the treasure were melted or repurposed by Octavian's forces, transforming Cleopatra's gold into Roman coinage or ceremonial objects. While this may account for some losses, it cannot explain why many accounts suggest that significant portions of the queen's fortune were deliberately concealed and never recovered. Some researchers combine these ideas into a composite theory. Cleopatra's gold was not lost due to negligence or chance, but because of her foresight and strategic genius. By dividing her treasure, sinking parts, hiding parts in temples, and sending some abroad, she created a multi-layered system of concealment. In this scenario, the gold's disappearance is not a failure, but a deliberate triumph over her conquerors, a testament to her intellect, cunning, and understanding of human and natural systems. The intrigue surrounding Cleopatra's gold has inspired debates, expeditions, and even conspiracy theories in modern times. From sunken barges in the Nile to secret vaults under temples, from smuggled treasures in distant lands to vanished artifacts in Roman hoards, each theory has its proponents and critics. What is certain is that no single explanation fully accounts for the scale, sophistication, and mystery of her wealth. Ultimately, the hypotheses converge on one key idea. Cleopatra's treasure was not merely a collection of gold and jewels, it was a manifestation of her strategy, her will, and her desire to leave a legacy beyond death. It is this combination of mystery, intellect, and historical significance that continues to fascinate historians, archaeologists, and treasure hunters alike. Centuries after the fall of the Ptolemaic dynasty, the story of Cleopatra's lost gold did not remain confined to the pages of history books or the dry sands of archaeology. It transcended time, embedding itself into the very fabric of literature, film, and global imagination. From the medieval bazaars of Cairo to the silver screens of Hollywood, her treasure became a symbol of allure, ambition, and mystery. By the Renaissance, artists had already begun to depict Cleopatra not just as a political genius, but as the embodiment of opulence. Painters imagined her surrounded by gold ingots, jeweled crowns, and ceremonial treasures, reclining amid the wealth that had eluded Rome. Sculptors and illustrators used gold leaf and precious stones to capture the idea of her extraordinary fortune, creating visual narratives that would inspire generations. In literature, Cleopatra's lost treasure fueled countless stories of adventure and intrigue. European novels from the 16th and 17th centuries often combined fact and legend, describing explorers following cryptic maps to hidden chambers, facing traps, curses, and secret guardians. The queen herself was portrayed as both a temptress and a mastermind, her treasure a reflection of her intelligence and seductive power. Writers used her wealth as a narrative device to explore human greed, ambition, and the allure of the unknown. The 19th and early 20th centuries brought the age of modern fiction, where Cleopatra's treasure became a favorite motif in novels, adventure stories, and pulp magazines. Tales of sunken barges in the Nile, hidden temple vaults, and secret convoys spread across Europe and the United States. Explorers in these stories often mirrored the real-life archaeologists of the era, combining scholarship with danger, mystery, and the thrill of discovery, Hollywood cemented Cleopatra's gold as a cultural icon. Films such as Cleopatra, 1963, starring Elizabeth Taylor, highlighted the Queen's lavish lifestyle and legendary wealth, emphasizing the opulence of her court, her jewelry, and her golden regalia. Although dramatized, these visual narratives captured the imagination of audiences worldwide, reinforcing Cleopatra's image as the ruler whose treasures defied time. In more recent decades, video games, documentaries, and television shows have continued to explore the mystery. Titles focusing on Egyptology, treasure hunting, or historical adventure often reference Cleopatra's lost gold as a symbol of ultimate discovery. Some games place players in the Nile Delta, searching for sunken barges and hidden vaults. Others let them unravel clues in ancient temples, all inspired by centuries of legend and historical evidence. Pop culture has also expanded the legend into symbolic realms. Cleopatra's gold represents ambition, strategic genius, and the enduring human fascination with hidden riches. It has become a metaphor for the pursuit of knowledge and the thrill of discovery, an eternal reminder of how one woman's wealth, cunning, and foresight could echo across millennia. Museums, exhibitions, and digital platforms continue to display artifacts associated with the Queen, offering tangible connections to her story. Even small coins, amulets, and ceremonial jewelry pieces spark curiosity, linking modern audiences to the grandeur and mystery of Ptolemaic Egypt. Every exhibition, every book, every game or movie ensures that Cleopatra's lost gold is not merely history. It is legend brought vividly to life. In the end, the Queen's treasure lives not only in vaults or tombs, but in the collective imagination of the world. From ancient chronicles to modern cinema, Cleopatra's lost gold continues to inspire, enthrall, and challenge us, reminding humanity that some mysteries are designed to endure, captivating generations long after the sands of time have shifted. Imagine for a moment that Cleopatra's lost gold is finally found. The sands of Egypt shift, revealing a hidden vault beneath Taposiris Magna. The Nile, long a silent witness, whispers the secrets of sunken barges now raised by modern submersibles. Archaeologists uncover treasure beyond imagination, ingots of pure gold, jeweled crowns, ceremonial artifacts, and delicate amulets, preserved for over 2 millennia. The discovery would be nothing short of historic. News outlets across the globe would broadcast images of Cleopatra's wealth, captivating millions. Scholars would rush to study the artifacts, analyzing inscriptions, construction techniques, and artistic styles to reconstruct the Queen's final days and the scale of her cunning. Historians could finally verify ancient accounts, Roman records, and Arab chronicles, connecting fragments of legend with tangible evidence. The economic and cultural impact would also be profound. Museums would host exhibitions showcasing treasures that bridge history, art, and archaeology. Coins and jewelry would tell stories of trade, diplomacy, and political strategy. Every item would provide insight into Ptolemaic Egypt's economy, craftsmanship, and Cleopatra's unparalleled intelligence in protecting her kingdom's wealth. Beyond academia, the discovery would ignite imagination worldwide. Authors, filmmakers, and game developers would recreate the final weeks of Cleopatra's reign, dramatizing the secret movements of her gold, the ingenuity of her hiding strategies, and the relentless Roman pursuit. Treasure hunters, inspired by modern technology like ground-penetrating radar, sonar, and AI-assisted mapping, would dream of uncovering secondary caches still hidden across the Nile Delta or desert sands. The find would also provoke questions about morality, ownership, and cultural heritage. Should the treasure remain in Egypt, a legacy of the nation's greatest queen, or be dispersed across the globe for study and display? International debates would mirror centuries-old fascination, balancing the allure of discovery with respect for history and sovereignty. Perhaps most intriguingly, the ultimate discovery would transform our understanding of Cleopatra herself. Beyond the tales of romance and political alliances, it would reveal her as a master strategist who outwitted empires and safeguarded her people's wealth with unparalleled foresight. The treasure would no longer be just gold. It would be a testament to her intellect, vision, and enduring legacy. Even with such a find, some mysteries would likely remain. Were all treasures recovered, or did some continue to lie in hidden vaults, sunken barges, or distant kingdoms? Would the Queen's cleverest protections remain unbroken, leaving historians to chase secondary clues for generations? The allure of Cleopatra's gold lies not only in the treasure itself, but in the tantalizing possibility that part of it still waits to be found, a secret surviving across centuries. In this imagined discovery, we glimpse the full impact of history, legend, and human fascination. Cleopatra's gold, long a symbol of mystery and ambition, would finally reveal its story, connecting the ancient world to the present, and reminding humanity why some treasures are destined to inspire awe across time. Even after 2,000 years, Cleopatra's lost gold remains one of history's most tantalizing enigmas. From the bustling streets of ancient Alexandria to the modern corridors of museums, universities, and digital archives, her treasure has endured, not just as metal and jewels, but as a symbol of human curiosity, ambition, and imagination. Historians, archaeologists, and treasure hunters alike have pursued the Queen's wealth, following the trails she meticulously laid, decoding fragmented papyri, and exploring riverbeds and temples. Yet every discovery, from sunken coins to amulets, has only deepened the mystery. Cleopatra's genius lay not merely in her accumulation of wealth, but in the foresight to conceal it so cleverly that even the mightiest empire of her time, the Romans, could not claim it all. The story of Cleopatra's gold transcends tangible treasure. It is a narrative woven through centuries, across cultures and continents, inspiring writers, artists, filmmakers, and game designers. Each generation has added its own interpretation, mythologizing the Queen's ingenuity and her fortune. The gold itself has become a metaphor for intellect, strategy, courage, and the enduring allure of the unknown. From Arab chronicles to Renaissance maps, from Hollywood epics to modern archaeological explorations, the fascination with Cleopatra's treasure continues to captivate imaginations. It reminds us that history is not only about what is recorded, but also about what is hidden, what is imagined, and what challenges us to search further. Perhaps that is the ultimate legacy of Cleopatra's gold. It is eternal, not because it is material, but because it endures in human curiosity. Every rumor, every expedition, every story told to enthralled audiences across the globe keeps her wealth alive in memory, culture, and legend. Even if the sunken barges in the Nile or the secret temple vaults are never fully uncovered, the mystery of Cleopatra's gold will continue to inspire awe and wonder. In the end, Cleopatra's treasure teaches us more than just history. It teaches us about strategy, resilience, and the power of leaving a legacy that transcends time. For as long as humans dream of discovery, adventure, and intellect, Cleopatra's gold will remain not lost, but eternally alive in our imagination. The Queen may have vanished, her empire absorbed into the pages of history, but the legend of her lost gold endures. A treasure hidden yet immortal, a timeless reminder that some mysteries are meant to captivate generations, challenging us to seek, wonder, and imagine. So whether Cleopatra's gold was hidden in plain sight, protected by temple priests, or deliberately sunk into the unknown currents of the Nile, only a fraction of her true wealth was ever recovered by Rome. The rest remains the stuff of legend. This mystery of the lost treasure doesn't just teach us history, it teaches us about strategy, resilience, and the power of leaving a legacy that transcends time. For as long as humans dream of discovery, Cleopatra's gold will remain not lost, but eternally alive in our imagination. And if you want to explore more mysteries, thrilling stories of the ancient world, and the untold chapters of history, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. Your curiosity is the fuel for our next discovery. We'll see you in the next search for the truth.